Christmas Eve, December 24th, 2002. Most of America is wrapping gifts, lighting candles, sitting by warm fireplaces with the people they love. But in Modesto, California, a young woman, 8 months pregnant, walked out of her front door, and she was never seen alive again. Her name was Laci Peterson. She was 27 years old, glowing with the joy of a first-time mother just weeks away from giving birth to her son, a boy she and her husband had already named Connor. Her husband said he went fishing that day. He said everything was normal. He said he had no idea what happened. But here's what makes your blood run cold. Months before investigators found Laci's body, her husband had already told his girlfriend that his wife was dead. So is this a terrible tragedy? Or one of the most calculated, cold-blooded murders in American history? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to be left asking yourself one question. How does someone look into the cameras, stand beside search volunteers, and beg the world to find his missing wife, while already knowing exactly where she was? Welcome back, or if you're new here, welcome to Dark Files. This is the channel where we go deep, where we don't just skim headlines, we pull back every layer, examine every detail, and ask the questions that most people are afraid to sit with. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications, because we drop new cases every week, and trust me, you do not want to miss what's coming. Now, let's get into it, because this case, it changed American true crime forever. To understand what happened on Christmas Eve 2002, you have to understand who Laci Peterson was. Laci Roca was born on May 4th, 1975, in Modesto, California. By everyone's account, family, friends, neighbors, she was one of those rare people who seemed to radiate pure warmth. She loved cooking, she loved entertaining. She obsessively watched Martha Stewart and decorated her home with the kind of care that said, "I am building something here. I am building a life." In 1994, Laci was attending California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo when she met a young man named Scott Peterson. Scott was charming. He was handsome. He smiled easily and said all the right things. He was, by every outward measure, the kind of man a woman dreams about bringing home to her mother. They married 2 years later. They bought a 3-bedroom bungalow on Covina Avenue in an upscale neighborhood in Modesto. Scott got a job as a fertilizer salesman, earning around $5,000 a month. Laci worked part-time as a substitute teacher. From the outside, it looked picture perfect. But I want you to remember something as we go through this story, and this is important. Things that look perfect on the outside can be hiding something very dark on the inside. In early 2002, Laci became pregnant. Their due date was February 10th, 2003. They were going to have a boy. They had already picked the name, Connor. Laci was over the moon. She decorated the nursery. She prepared for motherhood with everything she had. But while Laci was building a future for her growing family, Scott Peterson was quietly building something else entirely. In November 2002, just weeks before Christmas, and just weeks before his wife was due to give birth, Scott Peterson was introduced to a woman named Amber Frey. Amber was a 27-year-old massage therapist from Fresno, California. She was introduced to Scott through a mutual friend. Now, here's where I need you to really pay attention, because this detail is one of the most damning in this entire case. Scott told Amber Frey that he was single, not separated, not going through a divorce, single. But it gets worse. On December 9th, 2002, 2 full weeks before Laci Peterson disappeared, Scott Peterson told Amber Frey something that should send a chill down your spine. He told her that he was a widower. He told her that his wife had died, and that this Christmas would be his first without her. His wife, Laci Peterson, was alive, well and 8 months pregnant when those words came out of his mouth. So the question that investigators would later focus on is devastating. Was Scott Peterson telling his girlfriend his wife was dead because he had already decided she was going to be? The prosecution believed the answer was yes. They believed Scott began planning Laci's murder at least 2 weeks before she disappeared. Think about that. Think about what it means to sit across from someone you've deceived into thinking you grieving widower, and smile, and laugh, and make plans for a future, all while your pregnant wife is at home, preparing for the birth of your son. Now ask yourself this question, and I want you to really sit with it. What kind of person tells a woman his wife is dead before she actually is? Keep that question in your head because we're about to walk through what happened next. December 23, 2002. The night before Christmas Eve. Laci and Scott went together to Salon, the workplace of Laci's sister, Amy Roca, to drop off a gift. By all accounts, Laci was in good spirits. She was glowing. She was excited. She was weeks away from meeting her son. That was the last time Amy would see her sister alive. The following morning, December 24th, Christmas Eve, Scott Peterson claimed he left home at approximately 9:30 a.m. to go on a solo fishing trip at the Barkley Marina, roughly 90 miles from Modesto. He said Laci was still home when he left. He said she had planned to walk their golden retriever, Mackenzie, and mop the kitchen floor. He said everything was normal. When Scott returned home that afternoon, he claimed he found the house empty. Mackenzie, the dog, was outside in the backyard, still wearing his leash as if he had never been taken for a walk. But Laci was gone. Scott called his mother-in-law Sharon to ask if Laci was with her. Sharon said no. That call was the moment Sharon first learned her daughter was missing. That evening, Laci's stepfather and Scott both filed missing person reports with the Modesto Police Department. Now here is something worth noting, and I want you to think about this carefully. When police arrived, Scott told a neighbor he had been golfing that day, not fishing. He only settled on the fishing story later. When investigators pressed him, he couldn't produce a fishing license. He had purchased a small aluminum boat just weeks before Laci disappeared, and had never taken her or anyone else out on it. And the location he claimed to have been fishing? The Barkley Marina. San Francisco Bay. Write that down. Because we're coming back to it. Within days, the disappearance of Laci Peterson became national news. Volunteers flooded Modesto. Search parties fanned across the city. Candlelight vigils lit up the streets. A $500,000 reward was posted for information leading to Laci's whereabouts, and Scott Peterson, he was there. At the vigils. At the command centers. Handing out flyers. Being interviewed by news cameras. On national television, he made tearful appeals for his wife's safe return. But here's something that disturbed people watching at the time, and it became a major point of public conversation. At one of Laci's candlelight vigils, witnesses reported seeing Scott laughing. Not a nervous, uncomfortable smile. Laughing. Investigators were watching him closely. And the more they watched, the more alarmed they became. Scott had reportedly tried to sell Laci's car. He was talking to a realtor about selling their home. The home where Laci had built the nursery for baby Connor. And then, on December 30th, 2002, just 6 days after Laci disappeared, a phone call changed everything. Amber Frey called the police. She had seen news coverage of Scott's missing pregnant wife. She recognized him immediately. And she told police everything. Police acted fast. They gave Amber a recording device and asked her to keep talking to Scott to record every call. And what those recordings revealed over the following weeks was extraordinary. In one recorded call, Scott Peterson told Amber Frey he was in Paris, near the Eiffel Tower, watching New Year's celebrations. He was actually in Modesto, searching for his missing wife. I want to stop here and ask you something, because I think it is one of the most important questions in this entire case. If your wife was genuinely missing, if you had no idea where she was, would you be on the phone with your girlfriend, pretending to be in Paris on New Year's Eve? What does that behavior tell you about what Scott Peterson already knew? 4 months passed. Winter turned to spring. February 10th, 2003 came and went. The date Connor Peterson was supposed to be born. And then, on April 13th, 2003, something washed ashore in San Francisco Bay. The decomposed remains of a male fetus. 1 day later, April 14th, 2003, the torso of a woman was found nearby. The remains were headless. The limbs were missing. But DNA testing confirmed what investigators had feared. The woman was Laci Peterson. The baby was Connor. And the location where they were found? Point Isabel? San Francisco Bay, approximately 1 mile from the Barkley Marina. The exact stretch of water where Scott Peterson claimed he had been fishing on Christmas Eve. Think about the statistical probability of that. The San Francisco Bay is massive. The California coastline stretches for hundreds of miles. And yet, the bodies of Laci and baby Connor washed ashore within a single mile of the precise coordinates Scott Peterson voluntarily gave to investigators on the very first day. The prosecution would argue there was only one explanation for that. Scott Peterson dumped their bodies there himself. On April 18, 2003, the same day, DNA confirmed the identities of Laci and Connor. Police moved to arrest Scott Peterson. They caught up with him at a golf course in Loyola, San Diego, nearly 400 miles from Modesto. When they arrested him, here's what they found. His hair had been bleached blonde. He was carrying $15,000 in cash. He had 4 cell phones. He was carrying his brother's ID card. He had camping equipment, survival gear, and a map with directions to the Mexico border. The defense would later argue this wasn't an attempt to flee, that Scott was just going through a difficult time and needed to get away. But here's what I want you to think about. When an innocent man, Zeth's wife and baby, are found murdered, does he bleach his hair? Does he drive toward the Mexican border with $15,000 cash and someone else's ID? Or does he drive back to Modesto, to be with his family, to speak to the press, to demand justice? You tell me. Scott Peterson was charged with 2 counts of murder, first-degree murder for Laci, and second-degree murder for unborn baby Connor. His arrest and trial ignited a national conversation that we are still having today. On June 1, 2004, the trial began. It lasted 5 months. More than 180 witnesses took the stand. Among the most powerful? Amber Frey. She testified about everything: the lies Scott told her, the romantic dinners, the promises he made, and most devastatingly, those recorded phone calls. Calls where Scott Peterson told her he was traveling the world, attending parties, living his life, while his pregnant wife was listed as a missing person. The prosecution's case was built largely on circumstantial evidence. There was no video of the crime, no murder weapon, no confession. But the evidence they did have painted a compelling picture. Scott had bought a boat just weeks before the murder and had no documented fishing trips prior. He had no fishing license. The bodies were found near his claimed fishing location. He had told his girlfriend his wife was dead weeks before she disappeared. He had lied repeatedly about his whereabouts, his life, and his identity. And his behavior, selling her car, contacting realtors, being photographed laughing at her vigil, suggested a man not grieving, but relieved. The defense argued the case was entirely circumstantial. They pointed to a burglary that happened across the street on the same day Laci disappeared, suggesting she may have been abducted by strangers. But the jury wasn't buying it. On November 12, 2004, after 7 days of deliberation, the jury found Scott Peterson guilty. First-degree murder for Laci Peterson. Second-degree murder for their unborn son Connor. On December 13, 2004, the jury recommended the death penalty. On March 16, 2005, Judge Alfred DeLucchi sentenced Scott Peterson to death by lethal injection. Sharon Roca, Laci's mother, delivered a victim impact statement that left the courtroom shattered. She spoke about the grandson she would never get to hold, about the Christmas mornings that would never be the same. Scott Peterson said nothing. The story doesn't end at sentencing, and this is where it gets complicated. In August 2020, the California Supreme Court overturned Scott Peterson's death sentence, not because of innocence, but because of errors in jury selection during the trial. Specifically, jurors who opposed the death penalty had been improperly dismissed. In December 2021, Scott Peterson was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. They began pursuing new evidence, new DNA testing, and access to previously undisclosed materials. A California judge granted the defense access to some of this evidence. Now, I want to be very clear here because this is important. Scott Peterson has maintained his innocence since day one. And while the jury found him guilty, and that conviction still stands today, the legal system is continuing to examine this case. Appeals are ongoing. The Innocence Project exists specifically to investigate cases where wrongful convictions may have occurred. Does that mean Scott Peterson is innocent? Not necessarily. Does it mean the case still has unanswered questions? Absolutely. And this is what makes the Laci Peterson case so endlessly gripping, so deeply uncomfortable, and so important to understand. Because here's the truth. The facts of what happened to Laci and baby Connor on Christmas Eve 2002 have never been fully, clinically, 100% established in a way that leaves zero doubt. What we do know is this. Laci Peterson was real. Connor Peterson was real. They were loved. They were robbed of a future. And the only person who truly knows what happened that morning on Covina Avenue is Scott Peterson himself. Out of this tragedy, something lasting emerged. In April 2004, President George W. Bush signed into law the Unborn Victims of Violence Act, also known as Laci and Connor's Law. This law recognized unborn children as separate victims in cases of federal crimes. It was directly inspired by Scott Peterson's death. The idea was simple and profound. If a pregnant woman is murdered, 2 lives have been taken. The law would now reflect that truth. Laci Peterson never got to hold her son. She never got to bring him home, or read him his first bedtime story, or watch him take his first steps. She had decorated a nursery. She had picked out a name, she had dreamed of a future. And that future was stolen from her. Whatever you believe about the guilt or innocence of Scott Peterson, that is the reality at the center of this story. A young woman, a baby boy, a Christmas Eve morning, and a family that has spent over 20 years trying to make sense of something that may never make sense at all. So now I want to turn this over to you, because this case raises questions that go far beyond the courtroom. What do you believe? Do you think the right man is in prison? Or do you think there are pieces of this puzzle we haven't seen yet? And here, Lager question, the one I keep coming back to every time. I research this case. How well do we actually know the people closest to us? Because Laci Peterson's family thought they knew Scott. Her friends thought they knew Scott. Amber Frey thought she was falling for a grieving widower. Everyone in this story was looking at the same man and seeing something completely different. That's what makes this case so chilling and so human. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Tell me what you think happened. Tell me what part of this story hit you the hardest. And if you've made it this far, thank you. You are the reason Dark Files exists. If you haven't subscribed yet, what are you doing? Hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on the bell. Share this video with someone who loves true crime. Because we are building something here. A community of people who believe the truth matters, even when it's dark. Especially when it's dark. The file on Laci Peterson may officially be closed. But some questions never are. Until next time, stay curious, stay sharp, and watch your back.